Hi, everyone. Welcome to Survivor Talks with Vanity. It is so good to see you back here tonight. Okay, so if you feel triggered, got to give you the disclaimer. Please go take a break and rejoin us when you can. So, tonight on Survivor Talks, we are honored to welcome an incredible guest, Bambi Lynn. Bambi is passionate. She's a passionate storyteller, speaker, author, and motivational influencer with over 15 years of experience helping individuals heal through the power of storytelling. She specializes in using personal narratives to inspire transformation, build resilience, and foster deep connections. Through her platform, Healing Through Stories, Bambi empowers others to embrace vulnerability, reframe their experiences, and find strength in their stories. Her work has touched countless lives, offering hope and practical tools for emotional healing and self empowerment. So get ready for an inspiring conversation tonight as we explore her storytelling and how storytelling can be a catalyst for healing and personal growth. Please welcome Bambi Lynn.
Well, hello. I'm so excited to be on today.
Hey, Bambi, thank you for joining us tonight. How are you feeling?
Well, just like I said prior, I'm not feeling good, but I'm ready to, you know, get into the topic and,
Yes.
and let's use this time to start healing some souls.
Yes, I love that. So, can you share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am a mother of 6 adult children. I have 13 grandchildren. I am a transplant from Buffalo, New York to the Golden Isles of Georgia. I am a two-time published author, but my third book comes out in June. So I wrote my memoir at 52 years old. I decided to start taking the pain and the trauma and the things that I had gone through in my life and start using it to become the person I was always meant to be. That I didn't need to have my trauma be my death sentence anymore, but it is a first aid kit for myself and for the people behind me. So I decided to take a journey on making my messy, my messy life, my messy trauma, and turn it into a message to be able to, help other women to be transformed, that we don't have to live in our trauma. We all have it. We all been through things. We all have some scars that we're not leaving this earth, scarless. But it's what we do with our scars and what we do with our trauma. And I'm just choosing every day to be able to use that to further God's kingdom and also to help others realize that they got a message and they're messy.
Mm. I love that. So, you wrote a book at age 52?
I did. It's funny, things start changing in your life. People ask me, why did it take you, to your 50 and things like that. I think that in our 40s and our 50s with women, I think that we start going on a journey of finding out who we are, that we're not only moms, we're not only, homemakers, we're not only, nurses and doctors and things like that to take care of our children, but we become, when we look in the mirror in our 40s and our 50s, we start reevaluating our lives and realizing that we're a whole lot more than what has been pictured. And we're able to go on our own journeys of healing. I think that more of my healing took place in my 40s and my 50s. And
Yeah.
I think it's kind of amazing. I had my 40th birthday party was my promised land birthday. And because here you had the children of Israel wandering around the wilderness for 40 years, and then they get into the promised land. And I think that that's what happened, for myself, is that there was so much trauma and so much that I had to unravel, in my own life to be able to be the person I am today and to be able to open up my life and to be vulnerable and realize that vulnerability was a superpower, realizing that vulnerability was a good thing and not look at vulnerability as a bad thing, but look at it that I'm going on this journey, to be able to heal from, the things that happened to me in my past.
So, you went through some trauma.
I
You
sure
wrote
did.
a book, and that allowed you to open up to the world and be in a vulnerable state. Can you share a little about your journey, like what trauma
Absolutely.
experience?
Absolutely. The title of my book, that the first book that I wrote, I have two that are published, is called The Journey of Josephine. And it was my rag doll that I received when I was about 6 years old as a Christmas gift from my mother. Every year, my mom would make my sister and I a doll. And for some reason, Josephine, my rag doll, she became my confidant. She became my secret weapon, that nobody knew any of my secrets except for my rag doll, Josephine. And her and I went on a journey together. She helped mend a broken heart. I grew up in trauma, like a lot of us. I grew up in an alcoholic home. My dad was not a nice alcoholic. My grandfather liked to touch his grandchildren in ways that we should have never been touched. I went through growing up, we moved a lot because my mom would take my dad back, and then my dad would start drinking again and hitting her and things like that. Then he would go to rehab and find Jesus, and then he would come back. And, it was just a lot of turmoil and a lot of trauma that happened in our house. The day after my 16th birthday, I decided to move out of my mom's house. We didn't have a really good relationship. And I was trying to find love in all the wrong places. I was just trying to find something that said that I was important, something that said that, I had some value. I ended up moving in with an uncle that groomed me for 2 to 3 months and then started sexually assaulting me and abusing me. And I finally was able to get away from that. And I found myself kind of homeless in a way. I went to a foster home, got myself into trouble at a foster home. And instead of living up to, what I did, I decided to run because I wasn't used to anybody loving me, even through my mistakes. And I ran to a guy that I became his night girlfriend. Wasn't anything that I was looking for. I just needed a place to stay. I found myself on a bridge when I was 16 years old, almost 17, ready to jump, to take my life, to say, I just can't live this life anymore. And I didn't think anybody would even know or find that I was missing or even care. And so I went to jump off the bridge. I had a police officer stop me, grab me, put me into his back of his police car, take me to a psychiatric center where I found out that I was pregnant. And when I found out that I was pregnant, that was the day that I handed my life over to God. And I said, if there's truly a God and you truly are here, please save me and save my baby. And I will worship you and honor you and obey you all the days of my life. Didn't know what that was going to look like. All I knew is that I just wanted my baby to be saved. I moved in with a pastor, and the pastor and his family, they gave me a room to stay at for $50 a week. And I worked at McDonald's and stuff like that. And move it forward, I ended up marrying a man that was in our church. But he was very wayward and would cheat on me, and I would take him back, and he would cheat on me and would take him back. And then that marriage ended after 8 years. But in that marriage, there were 4 babies that were born, including my daughter. There were 8 babies I was 22 years old with 4 children. And he just kept having affairs. It finally ended. I ended up marrying again about 2 years after our marriage ended. And I married another man from the church that decided 2 weeks after we got married that the hitting began. And I then became a victim of domestic violence. And nobody would pay attention. Nobody would listen. I would go to Bible studies. I would go to prayer meetings and say, what he was doing. And they say, just bake him another pie, get dressed up, because if you're having sex with him, it's a spiritual warfare. Don't say anything to him. Just go into the bathroom and pray. And, all these things that as a woman, it's not our responsibility. It is our responsibility to pray for our husbands, but it's not our responsibility to pay for the sins that they are committing. And that was a hard lesson, to be able to learn. I was married to him for 8 years. And then finally, after 8 years, the marriage was dissolved. And I became a single mom of 6 children, 2 boys and 4 girls. And I ended up 8 years later marrying again. I married a pastor. And I figured if I marry a pastor, nobody's going to ever see the sins that I had on me, that I was dirty for having divorce and things like that. And that marriage only lasted a month because there was some mental illness that his family chose not to tell me. So I, did get an annulment. So there's a lot.
So you experienced childhood sexual abuse, ended up in foster care. Were you still around your family when you were in foster care, or were you just completely cut off from them?
I was cut off because it's a kind of a weird situation, because my uncle was my uncle by marriage, but he had a relationship with my mom.
Okay.
So it was a kind of a weird situation. So I couldn't go back to my mom. I couldn't. So I had to be in foster care and things like that, because she had the relationship with him.
Okay, so you basically navigated foster care on your own by yourself, and then you ended up running away, and suicidal ideation, tried to commit suicide, and then found out you're pregnant, and then gave your life to Christ.
I did.
Okay.
And during that time, I tried to commit suicide 2 other times. One time was I put a bag over my head. So my uncle, he came into my room that night, that he would find me dead. Another time I tried to take medication, that if I take the medication, that if he came into my room, he would find me dead. And neither one of them, worked.
Okay. What was the most challenging moment in your story, and how did you navigate it?
Most challenging, I would say probably being a victim of domestic violence. I remember when I was at 8 years old, my dad and my mom had decided that they were going to try to make it work again. And my mom was outside. She was cleaning some chairs, getting ready to pack up for us to move from New York to Virginia. And I remember going out to the door and saying, "Mommy, I don't want to go. Please don't make me go. I don't want to go." And my mom said, "You don't understand. You're going to go. Daddy has changed." And I said, "No, Daddy hasn't changed. Please don't make me go." And I was about 8 years old. I said, "I just want to live with my grandma." And my mother slapped me across the face. And my mother said, "You don't understand." And you know what? I didn't understand until 25 years later, when I was sitting being slapped across the face in black and blue, wondering, what in the world am I going to do? That it was it came full circle, because people think, that when you're a victim of domestic violence, they think that you're weak, that you're a weak person, that you did something, you could have fought something different. They don't understand that some of the strongest, bravest, courageous women are ones that are living with domestic violence, are the ones that are living with that pain and that secret that's happening in their house. Because so much of the time, being a victim of domestic violence, it puts all the blame and all the shoulders on us as women. We're being asked, "Why did you stay? Why did you stay?" And I'm an advocate now for women, and for the narrative to change. Stop asking me why I stayed. I was a mother of 6 children. Where was I going to go? I had no job. He took my money. He controlled everything. Where would you think I was going to go? How about let's change the narrative and stop asking me why I stayed, and start asking, why did he hit me in the first place?
And those questions can actually be re-victimizing.
Absolutely.
Sure, question.
Absolutely. Because because in your mind, you're thinking, "Oh my goodness, yeah, why am I staying? Why am I putting up with this?" It's not that I woke up one morning and thought, "Oh my goodness, I can't wait to get hit today. I can't wait to not know if he's going to be in a good mood or a bad mood." They continue to victimize us as women when we are really strong and courageous. For staying as long as
you're strong and courageous, and that is a very important question. I think at the time, when people ask that and you're in the situation, it's you don't really think about it, and when you do hear it, it can be very offensive, right? They don't understand. but for the ones who do break free, or even the ones that are still in it, and you do think about that question, it's an important question. Is like, why am I staying here? And I think it's important to get to the root of why we choose to stay in that situation, right?
And sometimes we don't even choose. And I think that sometimes that's what people don't understand. It wasn't that I chose to stay here. It wasn't that I chose to wake up and be a victim of domestic violence. Some of those choices were chosen for me.
Yeah.
That there wasn't, and I was part of the church. I was going to Bible study. I was telling my pastor, what was happening. I was going into Bible study, and we were going on fast and praying. And, and us women were told, win them without a word, win them without a word, just pray and, just let God do something. And there was so much of the responsibility that is so placed on us as women that something that narrative has to change. I'm not responsible because he chose to hit me. That is his responsibility, and so I think it takes courage to stay. And I think it takes courage to leave. And either decision that you make as a woman, I can't force you to make a decision. And the more that I keep telling you, you got to leave, you got to leave, you got to leave, you got to leave, the longer you're going to stay, because you've got to be sick and tired of being sick and tired. And you've got to roll over every stone that you could before you say, because women don't give up. It takes us a very long time to give up, for us to put our hands up in the air and say, I've had enough. So until she has had enough, it's my responsibility as her friend is to walk beside her until she's ready to do whatever she needs to do. And then if she's ready to run, then I'm ready to run with her. If she is ready to stay, then I'm going to stay with her. And I think that that's where friendship comes in, and that's where true friendship comes in, not trying to demand you to do something that I want you to do, because it makes us feel better. But you know what? The other thing is domestic violence, sexual assault, sexual abuse, pornography, hurt, pain, all of that within the church is messy. Ooh. And church doesn't do messy.
Because you encountered your abuse from
church,
from a pastor.
I was and a pastor and a worship leader, part of a worship band, a family, a husband that his whole family was from the church, but they don't know what to do with us. Where am I going? If I was to go to the pastor and the pastor was to say, okay, Bambi, we're going to get you out of here. We have a tendency as people to be in somebody's life when something's going on for about 3 weeks. Somebody dies, we're in that person's life for about 3 weeks, and then we move on with our own lives. If somebody has a baby, we're making food and we're bringing things to them, and we're wanting to do their laundry for about 3 weeks. Then after that, the mother is there with her baby by herself, and she's got to figure it out. It's the same thing with if you were to take on anybody that is a victim of domestic violence. You say, oh my goodness, she can come live at me. Okay, I'm coming with 6 children. No job, because I wasn't allowed to work. You don't have a job, you don't have a car, but somebody's going to take you in. How long do you think that person's going to take you in? Those kind of things are messy. And that's why so much of the time in the church, once you get saved, the church puts your salvation and all your testimonies inside of a box and doesn't want you to open them.
Did you have a friend as you were going through this abuse?
I did. I had some really good friends that walked beside me, that helped me, taught me what to do and, what to save, like we were like trying to save, because I didn't have the income, so I had to go grocery shopping and, and collect gift cards, without him having to, look at the receipt. There were so many different things that I had to do. Yeah. But it's just messy.
What was the breaking point for you? What made you finally say, okay, I had enough, I'm out?
It wasn't me, believe it or not. I went on a 21-day fast. Okay. A couple girlfriends and we went on a 21-day fast. And my prayer is that something would happen in my household that I was not there. And that it had nothing to do with me, but that he would be removed and I wasn't going to be part of the removal. And so for 21 days, I prayed that, God, you intervene, don't have me be here, and then it will be done. And there was an incident that happened within those days. There was an incident that happened that I was not there. I used to do clinical research studies. I used to be an overpaid guinea pig. And I was in one of those studies. Something happened. My daughter called the police, and the relationship had ended. And then we had gone through a 2.5-year divorce.
Whew. Why did it take so long?
Because when you are married to a narcissist, they find every which way possible to get you into courts, taking money from you, motioning the courts, going to trial, so he made sure that it wasn't easy, wasn't easy for me, and it wasn't easy, for my children.
So when I hear stories of domestic violence, and I've mentioned this before, I'm a survivor myself. I've experienced it. I was one of the lucky ones that is alive and was able to get out. And I believe that the Lord gave me a way out where, I can not get hurt. There's always signs, but sometimes we are blind to the signs. Sometimes, most of the time they're there. Sometimes they're not there right away, or we don't know what to look for. Would you say, looking back at when you first met him, were the signs there?
Oh my goodness. And, the signs were there. But part of it is, first of all, I had been married before. I was a born again, spirit-filled, love the Lord Christian. Mm-hmm. And I thought that I was going to be alone forever, because who was going to want me, because now I'm dirty, kind of thing. And he came into our church. His mom and we actually had met one time in the kitchen of the church, and she had asked me to pray for her prodigal. And I had asked her to pray for the return of my first husband, that it would be reconciled. So I'm praying for the return of her prodigal, which her prodigal ended up being my second husband, and didn't know it at the time. I saw the signs, but he had just come to the Lord, back to the Lord. He had walked away for 10 years and wasn't serving God. And then he came back, and, and I was this nice Christian girl. I, was raised in a Baptist background. He was more of a Pentecostal, charismatic background. He had been married before and had a daughter. And I found out that there was a lot of domestic violence in that. But I used it that he had walked away from God. And so that's why he was the way that he was, because he walked away from God. And now he wants to serve God. I saw situations. Here I am, a single mom, and I'm doing his laundry, making his dinners. He wasn't giving me any money. He wasn't taking us out. I was doing everything. Like, he came in and started being, the husband that wasn't a husband yet in our lives. We didn't have an intimate relationship until 4 or 5 months after. Well, then I got pregnant. And that was so hard. That was the first time that here I was pregnant at 16 years old, and I never once thought about ending my pregnancy with my daughter, ever once. But I was a Sunday school teacher. I was an usher in our church. I had 4 children that I was raising for the kingdom of God. And for the first time in my life, I wanted to end a pregnancy. I didn't want anybody to know, so I could run away, from the situation that I had found myself in. I ended up keeping, my baby, and come to find out they were identical twin boys. That instead of God's judgment on me, he gave me mercy. I should have walked away, but then now I had children. Now I'm having children, and he had told me that he was going to do everything he could to be able to take my children away from me. Mm-hmm. Well, then I had to do everything I could to try to keep this relationship going so I could protect my children.
So he used the children as pawns.
And then I accepted the pawn, and we ended up getting married. And I know I did not marry him because I loved him. I married him because I wanted to save my children. And
Fear.
I knew, yeah, and I knew that if he had them every other weekend, one day a week, that, my children were going to turn out to be godly men. At least at that time, I felt like, I had a responsibility to raise godly men for the kingdom. And I felt like if he had them every other weekend, one day a week, my children would turn out to be abusers. And so
Sound like sound like a wolf in sheep clothing.
absolutely,
Because
absolutely.
he wasn't a pastor at first, right?
He was in a band. He was on the worship team. And,
Right.
yeah, I wish I could have, looking back, I saw this. I even met with his ex-wife, and she told me what he did to her and everything. And I just, I didn't see a way out.
Yeah.
I didn't see a way out that he would have my babies. And I was not willing to take that chance at all. I wasn't willing to have his family have my children. I wasn't willing to have anybody else have my children. So if I needed to marry him, I didn't know he was going to start hitting me. I didn't know that was going to happen. There were he was very, very narcissist and just, he was always undertone, always like, and they would all, people that are abusers, they tell you half truth. So you're in your mind, you're going, oh yeah, I did say that. Oh, I did. I did yell at him then. But they feed it to you that it's got to be your fault. So when they hit you for the first time, you're like, yeah, I shouldn't have sat in front of the TV. I shouldn't have done that.
What helped you? First of all, you're very resilient because here you are sharing the story, and these things can be extremely hard to talk about for people.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when telling your story could be easy for some, but sometimes it can be hard at the beginning. Like you have to build yourself up.
Yes, you do. Yeah.
But because you've been through a lot, right,
Mm-hmm.
since childhood into your adulthood and experience not just one type of trauma, but different types, right? Which we would term complex trauma. What helped you keep going during your hardest moments?
Knowing that I served a God, that no matter what I went through, that he was still there with me. That sometimes I couldn't see him. Sometimes I couldn't reach out and touch him, but I knew that he was always there. I knew that even if none went with him, I was still going to follow him. I made that commitment when he saved my baby daughter. I made at that day on December 28th of 1986, when I gave and surrendered my life to Christ. And I said, if you save me and you save my baby, I will serve you all the days of my life. And I meant that because he saved my baby. And if God can save my baby and he can work out all of these miracles, then he can surely work out all this other stuff. Now, I want your audience to know that it has not been an easy road.
It's not.
It has been a tough road. It has been a road of falling into the mud and the muck of life and having to crawl myself back out. It has been so hard not to finally get sick and tired of being sick and tired of having you be the person everybody's talking behind your back. It got tiring being the person that I sat in church alone and nobody helped me. It got tiring, but for some reason, God gave me the grit and he gave me the determination and the courage and the bravery to say, it doesn't matter whether you believe me. It doesn't matter whether you're going to help me. It doesn't matter whether I have to go beg for bread. I know that my God will supply all of my needs, and I know that he will work it all out. I wish I could say that serving Jesus is like, woo-hoo, like this is exciting. I wish I can tell you that serving him is like the best thing in the world. All I can tell you is that serving Jesus is constantly falling at the foot of the cross and constantly falling at his feet and saying, God, please help me. I can't do this by myself. There were times that I had no money. There were times that my children ate cherry pie filling, and they laugh about it still today. when we're at Thanksgiving, they all make these jokes. There were times that I had no food, and my 4-year-old little girl would say, "Mommy, do you think that we can pray for peanut butter? Do you think that Jesus would give us peanut butter?" And we would sit and pray for peanut butter, and 2 weeks later, somebody would bring a case of peanut butter to our house and say, "I'm not sure why we brought peanut butter, but do you need some peanut butter?" When you were in the depths of despair, when you were in the depths of pain, in the depths of the pit of hell, God comes in and he reaches. And he may not be a God that gives you what you need right now, but he is a suddenly God. He may not give it to you as you're praying right now, but he's going to, because he promises that he will supply all your needs. There were times that we had I didn't know how to pay for rent, and one of my our landlord, that when my first husband left, he left me with nothing. And my landlord said, "I'll give you a year of free rent." Free
Wow.
rent. I have 4 children, and he gives me a year of free rent. So there's times that all of us that have gone through things in our lives and have gone through moments that we're like, we can't do this again. I wouldn't trade those moments for the world, because I have seen the hand of God move. But in the midst of those, you're like, "God, I don't know what you're doing, but I can't do this anymore. Like, I don't know why you think that I can take one more day, of this." So living your life for Christ and living your life not as a victim, to my circumstances. I didn't want to be known as a victim of my circumstances. I wanted to be somebody that overcame by the blood of the Lamb. I wanted to be somebody that that God gave me a superhero cape, and he put that superhero cape on me because I have survived my story. I didn't want to be those victims anymore. I didn't want to be the elephant in the room. I wanted to make sure that I'm releasing and coming out of the elephant in the room. I wanted to make sure that when I laid my breath and I died, and my last breath, would to know that anybody around me knew that I fought the good fight, and that it cost me everything.
Wow. It sounds like your experiences really shape the way that you see yourself in the world,
Absolutely.
your faith, and that there are a lot of lessons that you learned from your life experiences and your struggles. You talk about how faith plays a role in
Mhm.
your healing journey, because you absolutely have a healing journey, and
Yes.
you share pieces of that with us. How would you say family or communities has helped you in your healing process?
I had the amazing opportunity to be able to be on a podcast that talks about friendship. And the whole topic was friendship. That's his podcast. He wants to talk about friendship.
Mm.
And I told him that my definition of friendship was they were the air that I breathed, and that my friends were people in my life that took pieces of me and made them part of them, and gave me pieces of themselves to make who I am today.
Mm.
My friendships stuck by me closer than a brother. They stuck by me, even when my family didn't. My friendships made sure that I was okay. They made sure that I was surviving. They made sure that if I didn't have money for food, that they came over and they filled my freezer. If I didn't have a car, one of them gave me a vehicle to drive. They were people that helped heal me. They were people that, like when you think of Job and Job's story, and how he's sitting with his 3 friends, but they're all like mocking him, and they're all like telling him what he should do and what he shouldn't do. My friends sat, in the pit with me, and they rubbed the ointment, on me, and they believed in me. They spoke life, into me. I would not be who I am today if God hadn't given me the friendships, and that he has given to me the heroes, in my own life, that they absolutely were my heroes. And they still are today. You have to be a friend in order to gain friends. And I value people. I value who you are. I value when you are in my presence. I value who you are. And in that, people have valued who I am, and they count I always thought that, friendship, I always thought that I was getting the better end of the deal with friendships. And I realized in the last couple of years, that my friends looked at me that way, that they got the better end of the deal.
Yeah.
When you can have friends that stick by you and walk through it with you and are with you in the middle of the night and are with you when you are in so much pain and you're sick, and they still keep coming back, to rub that salve on you, friendships are very valuable. They become the air that you breathe.
Yeah, I love that the Lord has blessed you with good friends to
Yes.
help you through your journey. And that is a very important piece to have. We need that support. We need somebody we can trust, somebody we can talk to, especially because when you're experiencing abuse, it can distort your relationship with your friends and how you trust people, how you talk to people, and even how you connect with others. And it sounds like you were blessed to have really good connections, almost like that. Somebody once told me, it was like it's good to have, what was it Aaron that held up
Oh,
Moses'
yep, Aaron,
arms?
yeah, during the battle, absolutely. That Moses was,
Yes.
whenever Moses lowered his staff, the battle wasn't won.
Yeah, you had
Absolutely.
somebody to help you hold up your arms, and it's the same for you. You help others hold up theirs in times of need, and that's really a blessing to have. That's a gift, the gift of friendship.
Yes, absolutely. And I've been very, very, I've been very, very blessed,
Yep.
throughout all these years. I'm 55 years old, and I've had some, life of hard knocks.
Mhm.
But yet I've had people along the way that have held my staff,
Yeah.
for me. And when the battle, and, like just recently, I found out that my daughter was moving, to Alaska. I have children in the military, just like we discussed beforehand. And my daughter is my oldest, my pregnancy, my teenage pregnancy daughter. Like, we have this amazing relationship. And when I found out that she was moving to Alaska, I felt like for 2 days I was in a fetal position, just totally in pain. Like, I felt pain before, and this was like, oh, God, I don't think I can feel this pain anymore. Please don't, I can't go here. And I had my girlfriends, we always, the deal is in our lives, we would say, you need 10 minutes. And those 10 minutes was for us to scream, yell, carry on, do whatever we needed to do, pound our feet, act like a 2-year-old. But then after those 10 minutes, then we were going to tell you who you really are. And we're going to tell you the truth of everything. But you need that 10 minutes. And my girlfriends had found out that, that Amber was leaving, and they know the depth of that pain. And they would call me and say, you need longer than 10 minutes, don't you?
Mhm. Yeah.
Not Bambi. Come on. We know that you're upset. We know, you need more than 10 minutes, don't you?
Mm.
We'll sit here.
A little earlier, you had a moment where you were getting emotional, right? And I love how you kind of like regrouped and you talked yourself through your emotions. I noticed that, and with healing different situations with our family, ourselves, there could be setbacks, right? How do you deal with those along the way in your journey?
It was really difficult when I don't have a relationship with my family. That was extremely difficult because, especially being a Christian,
Yep.
especially hearing all the time what your relationship between your mom, and you hear about these generational curses, and you carry all this stuff. But I realized in my journey of healing, I realized that there's also boundaries. I can still love my mom, I can still love my family, but there are boundaries, and it's okay to build those boundaries. I am like, I hate being called the black sheep of the family, but I'm the elephant in the room in my family, that nobody wants to talk about anything but me. I want to talk about the issues and let's deal with the issues so we can move on from the issues. But nobody wants to do that. So I decided that I'm not going to keep trying. I'm going to build those boundaries. And if there's a relationship, we can. My dad just recently, passed away.
Mhm.
And him and I had a very tough relationship,
I'm
actually.
sorry to hear that too.
Yeah, it was, and for a long time, my dad was told that I wasn't his daughter. So my dad treated me very badly because he thought that I wasn't his. And so he was really cruel and mean to me. And there was only, I wrote about, my second book, The Treasures of My Heart, I wrote about an incident that my dad did something with me. And that was the only thing that my dad ever did with me that showed me any kind of love. And when my dad was dying, I wrote him a letter. And when I was like 32, 33 years old, my dad and I were on my front porch. And I had asked him, why? Why did you treat me the way that you treated me my whole life? And then, he finally said, well, I was told that you were never my daughter. And so, but how I treated you was cruel and mean. And I'm really sorry that I did that. So our relationship wasn't great, but yet my dad was willing to take responsibility. And that's the other thing is with my mother, my mom wasn't willing to take any kind of responsibility. It was always our fault. And, some of it was our fault, but some of it wasn't. And she could have taken responsibility. My dad took responsibility. And when my dad died a couple years ago, I wrote a letter to my dad, and I had my half sister, read it to my dad. And my dad laughed. My dad cried. My dad said he remembered and, things like that. And he died with a peace. There was a peace between him and I. I didn't carry any kind of resentment. I didn't carry any kind of animosity. He worked through it as best he could. But and the other thing that helps you is the more that you get to know where your parents also came from, and you get to hear their stories. My dad, I don't think my dad could have been anybody else than what he was, because they didn't deal with trauma like that as kids. When they were young, they didn't deal with, the abuse that they went through. Nobody talked about it. We are now in a society today that we are now finally being able to talk about the pain that we have been through within our homes. We all carried it for so long. I mean, when I wrote my book, The Journey of Josephine, after I read my book and I closed it and I said, God, I don't know this little girl anymore because I've grown up. But now I want to find her. I want to find her and give her the courage and the bravery to be able to write her own story. And I went to a woman's house. It was in the projects, a Black girl with 3 young kids. And we started talking about my book. And she said, we weren't allowed to tell, about our uncles and our houses. Mom knew what was going on, but we didn't talk about it. Yeah. And I asked her if she wanted to read my book. And she said, can I? And I said, yeah. 2 days later, she called me crying. And I said, are you okay? And she said, you spoke to my soul. It's the first time that I heard my story out loud, because I was always silenced. We live in a society today that lets take the opportunity that we have to be vulnerable, to be brave, to be courageous, to be able to tell our stories, because now is the time. We couldn't when we were little girls. We couldn't tell anybody what was happening. It's like all of us were inside of these globes, those snow globes, and we were living inside these snow globes thinking that we were the only one that this was going on with. But come to find out, it was going on with our friends and our neighbors. But we didn't talk about it.
That's crazy, how there's transgenerational trauma. It is a thing, especially in lots of families. I know that it has happened in my family too. And guess what? People be quiet about it. That one uncle, right? That one uncle that will molest multiple children. Everybody knows about it, and then they're quiet, and then they grow up with these issues, right? The effects of trauma. And then sometimes because I've looked back and I'm like, well, why are they acting like that? Or, why do they speak like that? Or why do they behave like that? And it's like, well, they were molested. And people know, and then they keep it a secret. But you are absolutely right. We're in a time where we do have more resources
Yes,
for us to speak out about these things. I am
absolutely.
an advocate. I don't believe these things have to be a secret. I'm like, yeah, we had somebody in the family, that's
Yeah.
African Americans, touching all the children. Everybody knew about it. People were scared to
To say
speak
anything.
up.
And, because we weren't going to ruin our families.
The
Our
family's already ruined, though.
family's already ruined, but we didn't get that. But now is the time to be able to talk. And, when she said that, she
Yeah.
said, thank you so much for, because abuse and trauma doesn't know color, doesn't know demographics, doesn't know race, doesn't know finances. All it knows is that we've been trapped.
Mhm.
And we've been trapped in believing that it was our fault.
Yeah.
And now we are here to tell you today, I'm here to tell you through my story, the journey of Josephine, that it isn't my fault. I was a victim of something that happened to me, but I don't have to stay that victim. I don't have to stay that person anymore that now, because I've been sexually assaulted, I've been molested, I've been beaten, it's not a death sentence to me.
Yeah.
Years ago, I had gotten burned, when I was in my 20s. I had a pressure canner blow up on me. So my breast had been burned. And I had to go to the burn unit. And what they do is that they put you on this metal bed and they tie your hands and they inject you with morphine and they start scrubbing the daylights out of you to
Yes.
try to get rid of the residue. That's what God has done to me all these years, is that, what, he's put me on the bed and he said, Bambi, let's scrub it off, hon. Let's get rid of the residue. And then what happens is that then you are getting new skin. So I don't have to represent the trauma. That's a death sentence. I don't need that death sentence. I need the first aid kit to be able to, the new skin to be put on me, the new salve to be put on me, so that I can go and I can help you, Vanity. That I can go and I can help you to be able to be on your scrubbing table and getting rid of the residue of life, so you can be who you are always called to be. I can't do that until I get rid of the residue and to get rid of the dirtiness that I felt. I had to get rid of that dirtiness because it had nothing to do with me. What happened to me had nothing to do with me. I was a young 4-5-year-old child, had nothing to do with me. I read Viola Davis's memoir. If you ever want to read an amazing memoir, read Viola Davis's memoir. It was incredible. But she's in a session with her counselor, and her counselor looks at Viola and she goes, Viola, that 8-year-old little girl already survived for you. She already went through it for you. It's done. All she wants you to do now is to walk forward. You don't need to keep going back to that 8-year-old little girl because she's already gone for you. She survived everything for you. And wow, we don't have to keep going back. I can take what I have learned, take what has happened to me, and now I can be transformed. I can be on the operating table, being scrubbed to get rid of all that residue so new skin can come on. So now I can take what has happened to me and not blame God. I can get rid of the blaming. I can get rid of the unforgiveness because now I've been set free, because now I got new skin.
Jesus.
But you can't get set free until you've been scrubbed.
Yeah.
And we have to stop blaming, things that have happened and think that it has something to do with me. No, but it's going to transform me. It's transforming to the person that I am today. Would I ever want to go through it again? No. I went skydiving one time. At 49 years old, I went skydiving. And what a representation of what life is all about is that, you get onto you're strapped, and you're cocky as all get out because, you're going to conquer life. You get up into the plane, 17,000 feet, you get to the edge. They tell you, they're going to wait for you to be pushed out because they don't want to count because you would stop, being jumped out. They push you out, and all of this stuff. I had gum in my mouth. I vomited. All the stuff is flying at me. And then they tell you, you must, when you land, don't land on your feet, don't land on your legs. You must land on your ass. And so you're trying everything you can to be able to land on your ass. And, and I'm a little heavier kind of woman. So, I'm rolling, pollying, from jumping out of this plane. But isn't that life? That's what life is about. Life is about always having to fall on our asses and getting back up again. It's when we stay on our asses and we don't do anything about it and we want to feel sorry for ourselves. I'm not the only victim of domestic violence. I'm not the only victim of sexual assault. I'm not the only victim that had a father that was an alcoholic. Statistically, there are 2 out of 4 of us women that have been sexually assaulted. So there's a whole lot of us. So I can't continue to stand in the corner feeling sorry for myself, because there's other women out in this world that need me. There's women in this world that need me to tell them that you don't have to live that way anymore. You don't have to live with that pain anymore.
You just dropped us a powerful message. You've been through a lot, Bambi. You've experienced a lot, and you are an overcomer. And what I'm hearing you say to all of you who are listening, Bambi is saying that you're an overcomer, that you can overcome your traumas. You don't have to keep looking back. Basically, use what you've experienced and let it propel you forward. Go be great. Do great things. Help the next person. Get that healing. Get the
And if you fall on your ass,
analogy too, by the way.
Yeah, and if you fall on your ass, get back up.
Get up and keep moving forward.
Yeah.
And if you don't got to do it by yourself.
No.
You don't got to do it by yourself. That sounds like a powerful message. I would say, with sharing your story, how has it impacted the lives of others when you're sharing your story?
Well, I hope that it gives them hope. I hope that it, that gives them the courage to be able to share their own, that they're not alone. We're not an island. We are a community. We are a tribe, and we need each other. And we need, even if the world wants to divide us, we're really not divided. We really are locking arms with each other, and, do a lot of table talk. I sell t-shirts now that say "My Story, Your First Aid Kit," as a conversational piece that people walk by and go, "Hey, what does that mean?" It gives you the opportunity to be able to tell your story so that it could add to their first aid kit, in their toolbox, in their box. It's time for us to be vulnerable enough to tell our stories. People say you need to be careful who you tell your story to, and I get that. But I'm not. I'm not careful who I tell my story to, because everybody needs to hear it. Everybody needs to hear that little glimpse of hope. And what you choose to do with my story, that's up to you. Yeah. If you choose to want to ruin me or do whatever, that's up to you. But I'm here to tell my story as much as I possibly can, because we need to be set free. The Bible tells us that he has opened up the prison gates and he has let the captive free. We do not need to be captive anymore. We don't need to be captive of our past. We don't need to be captive of the situations that we have been through, and the trauma and the heartache and the brokenness that we have gone through. Jesus has opened up the prison gates.
Yes.
And allowed us to run through. Let's run. Run to the cross, run to the feet of the cross, and understand who you really are. Know that he has died and he has set you free to do something great and mighty.
Yes. And, whoever wants to use your story against you, they don't even have that authority. So we're not even going to give them that power and authority. Not over here.
Not over here.
They don't get that power and authority. Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I just hope that this is, I just hope that your listeners hears both of us, both of us that have been set free, both of us that have drank the milk and honey. We're no longer in the desert. We're now in the promised land. We're not in the desert anymore. We're not wandering around anymore. We're now eating milk and honey into the promised land. And that's where God wants us to always belong. This world threw us a loop and, threw us some heartache. It did.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry for some of the things that people have gone through in their lives, but let's take it and let's become victorious. Let's take those lemons that we have been thrown and let's make incredible lemonade. Let's climb up that mountaintop and see the horizon. And, the mountaintop to me, the mountaintop isn't as important as looking down to see how far it got me to get to the mountaintop. that I can see, the struggle and the dirty nails and the dirty knees and the falling and climbing and falling and climbing to get up to that horizon. The horizon is beautiful. It is amazing to see the horizon, but the climb and how we got there, that's where the real message is.
Mm-hmm.
That's the real message. And when you see, I think about the story, even like the allegory or the metamorphosis or whatever of, the an oyster shell. An oyster has no pearl in it until the oyster has gone through something. The oyster has to have the parasites go after it. It has to have the sand go after it. It has to have the hurricane and the winds to go after it in order for something to form inside of that, in order to form inside of that oyster. And the bigger, when you open up an oyster, the bigger the pearl, the more distress that oyster went through.
Ooh.
So count it all joy that when you open up your oyster of life, that God has given you a beautiful, big pearl because you have gone through some stuff and you have survived and you've gotten to the other side.
Wow. Bambi, you have really shared an empowering and inspiring story with us tonight. I thank you so much. I think that you have inspired our listeners to do something. Like, it's a very powerful message. Get up, keep walking forward. And where can people connect with you or support the work that you're doing?
You can, I have a website called healingthroughstories.com. And that's where my books are sold, The Journey of Josephine and The Treasures of My Heart. My third book will be coming out in June, and that's called The God Who Sees. What I did is I took 29 different women of the Bible and I made them more relatable today so that women can know and believe that the Word of God was written specifically for us, and God's covered every detail and everything that we have gone through in our lives. I am a prayer life coach. I do have a program that I am running now. It's an 8-week program, and the title of it is I'm Healing Through Your Story, Finding Your Purpose. It is an 8-week program. It's $240. $40 of it is stuff that I will send to you, in a box that we would go through each week, part of our workshop. And you do get my book, as part of that. So I do blog each week. If you subscribe to my website, and if you want to purchase something, subscribe to my website, and there is a 10% discount that on anything on my website, my books or my t-shirts and stuff like that, just not my program. But definitely go on healingthroughstories.com and pick up my book. And if it's something that you're interested in going on a life, a prayer life journey with me, I would be more than welcome to be, your coach.
Thank you. You're doing some awesome things there. So that is how you connect with Bambi. You all, I want to thank you again for sharing your empowering and inspiring, resilient story with us. You have definitely encouraged me. And until next time, that's all I got for y'all tonight. See y'all next week.
God bless.